You know, when I found that HOA security car blocking my driveway over utterly bogus violation claims, I never imagined I'd stumble upon the explosive secret that would ultimately bring down their entire corrupt empire. Seriously, what would you do if you suddenly held the legal power to dissolve the very homeowners association, making your life a living hell? Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. I was already running late for my big presentation when I saw it. That stark white security car, emblazoned with Sunrise Valley HOA, parked squarely across my driveway. My blood pressure shot up instantly. Now, this wasn't the first time, but today felt different. I had precisely 20 minutes to make it downtown, and my boss had made it crystal clear: be there or kiss that promotion goodbye. Karen Miller sat coolly in the driver's seat, tapping away at her phone, pretending not to notice me standing there fuming in my best suit. Despite having only been on the HOA board for 3 short months, she'd somehow managed to make everyone's life miserable. Taking a deep breath, I knocked firmly on her window. "Oh," she jumped, acting surprised to see me. "Is there a problem?" Her fake smile made my skin crawl. "Yes, there is a problem," I stated, trying desperately to keep my voice steady and professional. "You're blocking my driveway, and I need to get to work." Karen's smile didn't waver as she theatrically flipped through a stack of papers on her clipboard. "Well, according to our records, you have 3 violations that need immediate attention. Your holiday decorations weren't removed by the January 15th deadline. Your trash cans were visible from the street last Tuesday. And," she paused for dramatic effect, "your grass is 2 inches above regulation height." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Karen, I don't have any holiday decorations up. Those are Emily's lights next door. My trash cans are always in the garage, and I mowed just 3 days ago." "Well, someone filed complaints," she retorted airily, "and as HOA security, I am obligated to investigate." She glanced pointedly at her watch. "The board meeting is next Wednesday at 7 p.m. You can dispute these violations then." My phone buzzed. A text from my boss demanding my whereabouts. This couldn't be happening. "Karen, please, I have an incredibly important meeting. You can't just block people in their driveways like this." "Actually, sir," she began, her voice dripping with false authority. "According to HOA Bylaw Section 7.3, security has full authority to restrict access during violation investigations." She didn't even bother looking up from her phone. That's when I noticed something peculiar. The security vehicle was simply her personal car with a cheap magnetic sign slapped onto the side. Without hesitation, I pulled out my phone and started recording. "So you're telling me you're officially here in the capacity of HOA security?" I asked, making sure to capture her car clearly in the frame. "Of course," she replied, sitting up straighter, clearly reveling in her perceived power. "The board appointed me head of security just last week." "Interesting," I continued, keeping the camera rolling. "And you possess the proper licensing and insurance for that role?" Her smile faltered for a split second. "That's confidential HOA information." "Really? Because I'm pretty sure impersonating security personnel is illegal in this state." I bluffed, though I wasn't entirely certain. The way her face twitched told me I'd struck a nerve. "Are you threatening me?" Karen's voice rose an octave. "I'll have you know my husband is very good friends with Captain Davies at the police department." I checked my watch. 15 minutes until my presentation. "Karen, move your car now, or I'm calling the actual police to report you for false imprisonment." Because that's precisely what it's called when you deliberately trap someone on their own property. She sputtered for a moment, clearly flustered, then angrily threw her car into drive. "This isn't over. The board will certainly hear about your aggressive behavior." As I backed hastily out of my driveway, I caught a glimpse of Karen furiously typing on her phone. Something about this entire situation felt profoundly wrong. How did one person amass so much power so quickly? Why was she seemingly targeting specific neighbors? And most importantly, what secrets might I uncover if I started digging into our HOA's official records? Miraculously, I made it to my presentation with 2 minutes to spare, but my mind kept wandering back to that infuriating confrontation. Karen had mentioned HOA bylaws, and I had a strong feeling she was bluffing. That evening, I resolved to research exactly what powers our HOA genuinely possessed. Little did I know, I was about to unearth a bombshell that would change everything about our quiet little neighborhood. My hands were literally shaking as I clicked through the county records website. Later that night, what started as a simple search about HOA bylaws morphed into an all-night deep dive that promised to change everything. The bright screen illuminated my dark home office, while outside thunder rolled, mirroring the growing storm of excitement and indignation within me as pieces of the puzzle began falling into place. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Incredibly, our HOA's incorporation had expired 5 years ago, when the previous board had simply forgotten to file the renewal paperwork. Essentially, every fine, every rule, every threat they'd levied since then was technically illegal. My first instinct was to grab my phone and tell everyone, but I stopped myself. Karen and her cronies would undoubtedly destroy the evidence if they knew I was onto them. I needed to play this smart. Just then, a notification popped up on my phone. Another violation notice from Karen. This time, she claimed my recycling bin was visible from the street at 6:03 p.m., a whole 3 minutes past the supposed deadline. The accompanying $150 fine made my blood boil, but armed with my newfound knowledge, I actually managed a small, knowing smile. Suddenly, my doorbell rang, making me jump. It was nearly midnight. Who could possibly be here this late? Through my security camera, I saw my neighbor, George, hunched over in his wheelchair, soaking wet from the relentless rain. I rushed to let him in. "I'm so sorry to bother you so late," George stammered, water dripping from his gray hair, "but I didn't know where else to turn." He handed me a stack of papers, his hands trembling visibly. "They're fining me $500 for my grass being too tall," he explained, his voice thick with frustration. "I've been in the hospital for 3 weeks after my surgery. My lawn service couldn't even get in because Karen's so-called security car kept blocking my driveway." I helped George dry off and made him some hot tea while he showed me 5 separate violation notices, all issued while he was hospitalized. The latest one chillingly threatened to put a lien on his house. George had lived here for 30 years, long before the HOA even existed. Seeing this decorated veteran brought to tears by Karen's relentless bullying made something snap inside me. "George Gooch," I said, leaning forward, "what if I told you I found something that could potentially stop all of this?" I pulled up the county records on my laptop. As I explained my discovery about the expired incorporation, George's eyes grew wide with disbelief. But there was more. While helping George research his property lines for the grass violation appeal, we stumbled upon something huge. The original HOA boundaries, filed back in 1995, didn't actually include his property or 5 others on our street. Karen was tyrannically enforcing rules on homes that weren't even legally part of the association. The next morning, I called in sick to work. This was far too important. I drove straight to the county records office the moment it opened. The clerk, an older, helpful woman named Diane, could immediately tell I meant business. She patiently helped me pull every single document related, to our HOA's formation, property lines, and incorporation history. "Oh, honey," Diane said, adjusting her glasses as she scrutinized the maps. "These boundaries are all wrong. And see this notary stamp? It's not even a real notary number." Digging deeper, she pulled out more files, and together we discovered the original HOA paperwork was riddled with other problems: signatures that didn't match, conflicting dates, permits that were never properly filed. My phone buzzed again. Karen calling, probably to harass me about another fabricated violation. I declined the call, focusing intently on the documents before me. Diane helped me make certified copies of everything. As I was leaving, she touched my arm gently. "Be careful, dear," she warned, her eyes serious. "I've seen HOA boards do crazy things when their power is threatened. Document everything, set up cameras, and whatever you do, don't let them know what you know until you have all your ducks in a row." On my way home, I noticed Karen's security car following me. Instead of turning into my driveway, I drove straight to the local police station. Just as I suspected, the car quickly turned around and disappeared. I filed a formal harassment report with the police, showing them videos from my doorbell camera of Karen's supposed security guards blocking my driveway and taking photos of my house late at night. The officer looked troubled. "These security guards," he said thoughtfully, "do they have proper licensing? Because I don't see their company registered with the state." Bingo! Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. This wasn't just about an expired incorporation anymore. This was about an HOA board drunk on power, flagrantly breaking multiple laws while pretending to enforce non-existent ones. Back home, I found 3 more violation notices stuffed accusingly into my mailbox. But now, instead of inciting anger, they just made me smile grimly. In my home office, I created a secure folder on my computer and meticulously started documenting everything: property maps, violation notices, videos, photos, financial records, anything I could find. I wouldn't show my hand just yet, but when I did, Karen Miller would never know what hit her. A sharp knock at my door interrupted my work. It was Maria from across the street, tears streaming down her face. "They're making me take down the garden I planted for my late husband," she sobbed. "Karen says it's unapproved landscaping." I invited her in, my heart racing with a newfound sense of purpose. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. This was for George, for Maria, for everyone suffering under Karen's reign. Looking at my growing pile of evidence, I realized this was only the beginning. How many other neighbors were suffering in silence? How deep did Karen's corruption truly run? And most importantly, how many others would join me in bringing it all crashing down? My heart was pounding as I watched 20 of my neighbors quietly slip into my garage that Tuesday evening. Each face mirrored the same potent mix of fear and simmering anger I'd been carrying since unearthing that damning paper trail. George wheeled himself determinedly to the front, his hospital bracelet still stubbornly clinging to his wrist, while Maria clutched a box overflowing with warning letters about her cherished garden gnomes. What had started as my private battle against Karen was rapidly escalating into something much bigger. "Last week, they threatened to put a lien on my house," Mrs. Gable whispered, her hands shaking as she held up a thick stack of violation notices. "All because my son installed a wheelchair ramp after my hip surgery." Her voice cracked with emotion, and Emily, from next door, instinctively put a comforting arm around her shoulders. My blood boiled. This was the same kind woman who'd baked welcoming cookies for every new family on the block for the past 30 years. Mark, the high school art teacher who lived over on Oak Street, spread out photos of his house on my workbench. "They're demanding I repaint my entire house," because the white I used is apparently cream cloud instead of morning frost, he explained, rolling his eyes in exasperation. The colors look absolutely identical. That paint job cost me my entire summer savings. As more and more infuriating stories poured out, I carefully documented everything on my laptop. Times, dates, photos, copies of utterly ridiculous violation notices. Our case was growing stronger by the minute. Then, the sharp knock at the garage door made everyone freeze. "Security check," Karen's sharp voice rang out, punctuated by the flashing lights of her HOA patrol car visible through the garage windows. My neighbors quickly ducked behind shelves and my workbench, while George's wife swiftly pushed his wheelchair into a dark corner. I opened the door just enough to block the view inside. "Can I help you, Karen?" I asked, keeping my voice remarkably steady despite the frantic racing of my heart. She thrust her iPad aggressively in my face, displaying a grainy security camera feed. "We've received reports of suspicious gatherings at your property. Care to explain why cars keep appearing in your driveway way after hours?" I managed a calm smile. I wasn't aware the HOA monitored private driveways or restricted when homeowners could have visitors. "Could you perhaps point out where that's specifically written in our bylaws?" Her face reddened noticeably. "As head of security, I have every right to violate privacy laws," I interrupted smoothly. "Interesting. I'm sure the county would love to hear about unauthorized surveillance of private property." Karen's eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. "Watch yourself," she hissed menacingly. "Things have a way of happening to troublemakers in this neighborhood." She spun sharply on her heel and stormed back to her car, but not before I quickly snapped a photo of her license plate with my phone. Once she was gone, everyone emerged from hiding, looking shaken but visibly more determined than ever. "Did she just threaten you?" Maria asked, clutching her garden gnome protectively. "She certainly did," I replied grimly, "and that is going right into our documentation." I turned to address the anxious group. "Listen, what I'm about to tell you needs to stay strictly in this room. I have discovered something critical about our HOA's legal status that changes everything." For the next hour, we organized ourselves into efficient teams. Emily, who worked as a paralegal, volunteered her expertise to help research relevant property laws. George's wife, a former accountant, offered to meticulously analyze the HOA's questionable financial records. We created a private Facebook group under the innocuous name Sunrise Valley Recipe Exchange to communicate securely. Just as we were wrapping up, Debbie, Karen's assistant from the HOA office, slipped nervously in through the side door. Everyone tensed instinctively, but the look on her face told us immediately she wasn't there to spy. "I've been keeping quiet for months," she began, her voice trembling, "but after seeing Mrs. Gable crying at the office today about that ramp, I just can't anymore. There's something you all need to see about where the fines money is really going." Before she could pull out the papers from her bag, headlights swept ominously across the garage door. 2 HOA patrol cars rolled by slowly, their spotlights methodically scanning our properties. Debbie quickly stuffed the papers back into her purse. "Tomorrow," she whispered urgently, "meet me behind the community center at noon. I'll show you everything." As my neighbors crept home cautiously, in small, dispersed groups to avoid suspicion, I couldn't shake Karen's chilling threat from my mind. I double-checked my security cameras and locked every door and window. Later that night, just before midnight, a notification pinged on my phone. Motion detected in my front yard. The security feed showed a dark figure lurking near my prized oak tree, something metallic glinting ominously in their hand. I reached for my phone to call the police, but then, abruptly, the The screen went black. Someone had cut the power to my house. My hands shook as I deliberately slapped the thick folder of legal documents onto Karen's desk during the emergency HOA meeting. Her face turned white as a ghost when I presented the undeniable proof that our HOA hadn't even been legally valid for years. But what happened next sent a chill down my spine. Instead of admitting defeat, her eyes took on a terrifying, feral glint, reminiscent of a cornered, wild animal. Predictably, the very next morning, I woke up to find bright orange violation notices plastered aggressively all over my front door. Apparently, my unapproved Google mailbox color needed to be rectified within 24 hours. My perfectly ordinary, non-regulation welcome mat was suddenly against the rules. Even the charming bird feeder my daughter had made in school received a citation for attracting unauthorized wildlife. I tried to remain calm, meticulously filming everything on my phone, but Karen was always one step ahead, escalating her campaign of harassment. She started dispatching her security crony, Steve, to park menacingly outside my house at night, claiming they'd received anonymous tips about suspicious activity. The security car's headlights would glare directly into my bedroom window until 3 a.m. And somehow, only my house required this special, invasive attention. Things took a darker turn when my neighbors started getting scared to talk to me. Emily, who had faithfully brought me coffee every morning for years, suddenly started crossing the street whenever she saw me coming. George would only text me cautiously after dark, explaining that Karen had threatened to audit the finances of anyone who associated with problem residents. I wasn't about to give up, though. I spent my lunch breaks diligently digging through property maps and dusty old HOA documents at the county records office. Diane, the helpful clerk, started proactively saving relevant files for me, seeing how frequently I visited. "You wouldn't believe how many people just roll over and take it," she confided one day, shaking her head sadly. But Karen clearly had friends in high places, or at least wielded enough perceived power to intimidate contractors. Suddenly, my previously approved house paint became unauthorized. The garden I'd lovingly maintained for 10 years was now somehow violating a rule she'd seemingly invented just last Tuesday. Every morning brought fresh fines, each more ludicrous and punitive than the last. The real gut punch, the one that truly broke my heart, came when I pulled into my driveway after a long, draining day at work. The massive, majestic oak tree my dad had planted when I was born, the very one I'd climbed as a kid and later built my daughter's treehouse in, was lying tragically on its side, cut clean through at the base. A neon orange notice fluttered mockingly in the breeze: emergency removal of unauthorized landscaping elements. I dropped to my knees beside the fallen giant, touching the fresh sawdust with trembling fingers. My daughter's precious treehouse was smashed to pieces. The laminated family photos we'd kept tacked up inside scattered cruelly across the lawn. Through my tears, I spotted Karen watching from her front porch, sipping her coffee with that infuriatingly smug little smile. That tree had been my dad's last gift to me before cancer took him. Every spring, he'd patiently help me hang my mom's old wind chimes from its strongest branch, telling me stories about their life together. Now, those delicate wind chimes lay shattered in the grass, and Karen's sickening smile told me this devastating blow was exactly the reaction she'd wanted. But she didn't know what I'd discovered that very morning at the county office. Hidden away in the back of a dusty file cabinet, Diane had found something huge, something that would wipe that smug smile right off Karen's face. Documents conclusively proving the HOA had been secretly taking kickbacks from their preferred contractors for years. Every emergency tree removal, every mandatory house painting, every required renovation had been systematically padding someone's pocket. Slowly, I stood up, brushed the dirt off my knees, and took out my phone. As I carefully photographed everything, the felled tree, the broken treasures, the callous notice, and yes, Karen's smirking face, I remembered something my dad always used to say: sometimes you have to lose something precious to find out who your real enemies are. With shaking hands, I sent the photos to my lawyer. Tomorrow's HOA meeting was going to be very, very interesting indeed. My hands trembled slightly as I walked into the tense atmosphere of the emergency HOA meeting, clutching the thick folder of evidence that I knew would change everything. Karen sat imperiously at the front table, like a queen on her throne, her perfectly styled hair and expensive designer blazer a stark, jarring contrast to the weary, anxious faces of my neighbors filling the community center. The room buzzed with hushed whispers. Everyone sensed something significant was about to happen. I noticed Debbie, Karen's now former assistant, fidgeting nervously in the corner, constantly checking her phone, peculiar, as she usually stuck to Karen like glue. The room fell silent as Karen banged her gavel sharply, her red-painted nails wrapping around it like claws. "We're here today to address the growing problem of community troublemakers," she announced, her gaze fixed pointedly on me. "Some people simply don't understand the importance of maintaining standards." I stood up slowly, my voice surprisingly steadier than I felt. "Actually, Karen," I countered, my voice ringing clearly in the quiet room, "we're here to talk about standards. Your standards." I pulled out the first damning document, holding it up for all to see. Like the standard of having a legally valid HOA before attempting to enforce any rules. The color drained instantly from Karen's face, but she recovered quickly, her mask of composure momentarily restored. "How dare you question our authority? I've run 3 HOAs successfully before this one," she blustered, "all of which mysteriously dissolved." I cut in smoothly, pulling out more papers. "Funny, I did my homework, Karen, called every single one. They all seem to share the same peculiar pattern: escalating fines, vanishing funds, and remarkably creative bookkeeping." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Gable, our elderly neighbor, who'd been unjustly forced to remove her essential medical ramp, leaned forward intently in her wheelchair. George and Emily, my steadfast allies throughout this whole nightmare, began efficiently passing out copies of the documents I'd painstakingly gathered. Karen's perfectly composed mask finally started cracking under the pressure. "These are outrageous lies. Debbie, bring me the financial records, now!" But Debbie wasn't moving. Instead, she stood up slowly, her voice shaking but resolute. I can't do this anymore, Karen." She pulled out a small USB drive. "Not after what I found last night." The room went dead silent. Karen's face turned from pale to a dangerous shade of bright red. "Linda," Karen corrected herself sharply. "I mean Debbie, sit down right now or you're fired." "You can't fire me," Debbie retorted, growing braver with each word, "because I already quit. And more importantly, I sent copies of everything to the state auditor's office this morning." She turned to face the stunned crowd. "The HOA accounts? Karen's been embezzling thousands. Every fine, every fee, every special assessment, nearly half of it went straight into her personal offshore accounts." The room exploded. Mark jumped up, waving his ridiculous violation notice about his unauthorized white paint. "Is that why you made me repaint my house 3 times? Maria stood next, her voice breaking with emotion. "My garden gnome fines, they paid for your new Mercedes?" I watched, a grim sense of vindication washing over me. as Karen's carefully constructed kingdom began crumbling spectacularly around her. But then, I noticed her reaching stealthily for her designer handbag, and my heart stopped. What desperate move did she have planned now? She pulled out a thick stack of papers, slapping them dramatically onto the table. "If you think this is over, you're all dumber than I thought. I've got signed contracts with every major developer in the county. One word from me about community instability, and your precious property values will tank so hard you'll never recover." But I was ready for this too. I nodded discreetly to George, who calmly switched on the projector. Up on the screen, clear as day, appeared emails exchanged between Karen and the developers. Emails Debbie had courageously helped us obtain. Emails showing Karen had been threatening them too, promising to direct lucrative construction contracts their way in exchange for substantial kickbacks. Karen's face went from red to a startling shade of purple. She lunged desperately for her bag again, but this time Debbie was faster. "Looking for this?" Debbie held up another USB drive, her voice ringing with newfound confidence. "The original copies of everything? Don't worry, they're already safely with the FBI. I called them this morning." The room erupted in chaos once more. But through the tumult, I noticed something strange. Karen wasn't looking at Debbie, or the damning emails on the screen, or even at me. She was staring intently at her phone, her thumbs flying furiously across the screen. And despite everything crashing down around her, she was smiling. What on earth was she doing? What final desperate card did she possibly have left to play? As satisfying as this moment of reckoning was, a chilling premonition told me this battle wasn't quite over yet. The meeting room erupted into sheer chaos as Karen lunged desperately for the door. But George's tall, resolute frame instantly blocked her escape. My heart pounded against my ribs as I watched her wild eyes dart around the room like a trapped, frantic animal. She clutched her designer handbag so tightly her knuckles turned white, probably filled with incriminating evidence she was desperate to destroy. "Move out of my way," she shrieked hysterically at George, but he stood firm, arms crossed, embodying the same quiet strength that had seen him through weeks of painful hospital recovery. He simply, firmly said, "No." Calmly, I pulled out my phone and dialed 911, my voice remarkably steady despite my shaking hands. "Yes, we have evidence of major financial fraud occurring at the Sunrise Valley HOA office." Debbie stood beside me, clutching years of printed bank statements, clearly showing mysterious, large transfers to offshore accounts. Emily, my Christmas lights-loving neighbor, had already started live-streaming the entire dramatic scene on her phone. The look of pure, unadulterated panic on Karen's face when she finally noticed the blinking red recording light was almost worth all those agonizing months of harassment. Almost. Through the windows, I could see other neighbors gathering outside, drawn by the escalating commotion. Mrs. Gable had rolled up determinedly in her wheelchair, the very same one Karen had outrageously tried to fine her for installing a necessary ramp for. And she, too, was holding up her own phone, recording everything. "You don't understand," Karen's voice suddenly changed, shifting unnervingly into a sickly sweet, manipulative tone. "This is all just a big misunderstanding. I can explain everything." She attempted a smile, but it looked more like a desperate grimace. "Why don't we just discuss this privately? I'm sure we can work something out." I felt an icy chill run down my spine. This was the exact same saccharine tone she'd used right before orchestrating the brutal cutting down of my father's beloved oak tree. "The time for private discussions is long over, Karen," I replied, my voice firm and unwavering. "The police can handle it from here." As if on cue, flashing red and blue lights illuminated the windows. 2 police cars pulled up outside, and Karen's fake smile finally crumbled completely. She made one last, desperate attempt to push past George, but he didn't budge an inch. Officer Martinez, the same officer who had taken my initial complaint about the tree vandalism, walked in briskly with his partner. "Karen Miller?" Officer Martinez asked, though he clearly recognized her from our numerous previous calls reporting her escalating harassment. "We're going to need you to come with us." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Karen's designer bag slipped from her grasp, spilling papers everywhere. As she scrambled frantically to gather them, I caught glimpses of documents bearing offshore bank names, printed emails discussing creative accounting, and a detailed list tallying all the illegal fines she'd ruthlessly collected. "If I'm going down," she suddenly screamed, her calm mask completely shattered, "I'm taking everyone's property values with me." She whipped out her phone and started typing frantically. "One press of this button, and I'll post every dirty secret about this neighborhood on social media. Every violation, every fine, every piece of dirt I've collected. Your precious home values will plummet." The room went deathly quiet. I could feel the palpable fear radiating from my neighbors, the terrifying fear of losing their biggest investment, their home's worth. This was Karen's last, desperate power play, using our own deepest worries against us. For a fleeting moment, I saw doubt flicker in George's eyes, saw Emily lower her phone slightly. But then Mrs. Gable wheeled herself forward with quiet dignity. "Go ahead," she said clearly, her voice resonating with strength. "Post whatever you want. I'd rather live in a neighborhood where people actually help each other than one ruled by fear and intimidation." One by one, other neighbors nodded in solemn agreement. Maria stepped forward bravely, holding up her phone to show a website she'd already created, meticulously documenting all of Karen's abuses. Mark joined her, holding up official papers demonstrating how our property values had actually decreased under Karen's tyrannical reign of terror. As the police led a struggling Karen away in handcuffs, she was still yelling threats, but they sounded hollow now, utterly powerless. Through the window, I watched her being escorted unceremoniously to the police car, her perfect hair now a disheveled mess, her expensive suit hopelessly wrinkled. The neighbors gathered outside, parted silently like the Red Sea as she passed. Nobody spoke, nobody jeered. Our collective silence was somehow more powerful than any words could have been. As the police car drove away, I noticed something remarkable. Neighbors who hadn't spoken cordially in months were now talking quietly, sharing stories, finally free from the suffocating fear that had kept them isolated for so long. But then, my attention was drawn to a small, folded paper that had fallen unnoticed from Karen's bag during the chaos. As I picked it up and unfolded it, my blood ran cold. It was a signed contract with a major developer, dated for the following week. She hadn't just been stealing our money, she'd been actively planning to sell out our entire neighborhood for a massive, sprawling shopping complex, the final, ultimate betrayal, one that thankfully would now never happen. The morning after Karen's arrest, our neighborhood woke up to find bright orange violation stickers defiantly plastered across every single mailbox. Her last, petty act of revenge before being taken away. But this time, instead of fear, the sight made my neighbors laugh. We gathered spontaneously on my front lawn, peeling off those ridiculous stickers together while sharing stories of her absurd rules over welcome coffee and donuts. I pulled out the thick folder of documents I'd meticulously collected and spread them across my patio table for everyone to see. "Look at this," I announced, showing everyone the official state records confirming our discovery. Our HOA hasn't been legally valid for 5 whole years. Every single fine they collected during that time was completely against the law. The initial gasps quickly turned to cheers as I explained the process for potentially getting our money back. George, still using his cane from his hospital stay, pointed grimly at the financial records Debbie had bravely provided. "Karen didn't just take our fines," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. "She shamelessly used our HOA fees to pay for her own expensive house repairs and fancy vacations." Emily, whose controversial holiday lights had inadvertently started this whole chain reaction, was already busy making phone calls, offering to help residents in other neighborhoods check the validity of their own HOA papers. However, our impromptu victory party was briefly interrupted when 3 sleek black SUVs pulled up unexpectedly. Out stepped Karen's daughter, Jessica, flanked by a team of expensive-looking, stern-faced lawyers. "My mother built this community," she announced haughtily, waving some legal-looking papers, "and I am taking over as the new HOA president, effective immediately." I couldn't help but smile. "Actually, I countered calmly, pulling out my laptop. "I've been recording everything." Right on cue, the local news van I'd called earlier turned the corner. "And I think our entire city needs to hear this incredible story." Jessica's face turned as white as her mother's had the day before. The reporters absolutely loved it. "Corrupt HOA president arrested. Neighborhood uncovers 5-year secret," screamed the headlines on the evening news. My phone immediately started ringing non-stop, with calls from other neighborhoods grappling with similar HOA tyranny. We discovered we were far from alone. We held a big community meeting in my backyard that weekend. Not the strict, stifling, boring kind Karen used to preside over, but a real gathering, filled with kids playing freely, dogs running around happily, and genuine, open conversations happening everywhere. Mrs. Gable finally got to keep her essential medical ramp without fear of reprisal. Maria's garden gnome collection multiplied seemingly overnight, becoming a whimsical neighborhood landmark. Mark joyfully repainted his house the exact shade of white he'd always wanted. And the best part? We started a new group, not a restrictive HOA, but a genuine neighborhood association, where simply helping each other out was the only rule. When George needed his lawn mowed during his continued recovery, 5 families showed up spontaneously with mowers. When Emily's daughter was selling Girl Scout cookies, we all bought extra boxes, happy to support a neighbor. My new oak sapling, planted where the old giant once stood, grew stronger each day, surrounded by happy, engaged neighbors who actually looked out for one another. Some people initially worried our property values would drop without a controlling HOA dictating every little detail. But guess what? They actually went up. Turns out, having neighbors who genuinely care about each other is worth far more than any restrictive rulebook. Other communities started calling us regularly for advice on breaking free from their own oppressive HOAs. And Karen? Well, the court ultimately ordered her to pay back every single illegal fine she'd ever collected, plus substantial interest. She tried moving to that fancy retirement community she'd always bragged about, but they'd seen her notoriety on the news and promptly rejected her application. Last I heard, she had to move in with her daughter Jessica, who now, ironically, has to follow someone else's rules for a change. Those ubiquitous orange violation stickers became our neighborhood's enduring inside joke. We even framed one and hung it prominently in our new, collaboratively run community center, a potent reminder that while standing up to bullies can be incredibly scary, doing it together makes us infinitely stronger. Sometimes, the most suffocating rules aren't the ones written down, but the ones we passively allow others to impose upon us through fear and intimidation. This whole ordeal taught us that true community isn't built on rigid regulations and penalties, but on mutual respect, open communication, and genuine kindness. When neighbors stand together, support each other, and refuse to be silenced, they can overcome even the most entrenched corruption and build something far better in its place. A place where people, not arbitrary rules, truly matter. As I sit here now on my porch, watching the sunset paint the sky, my young oak sapling stretching confidently toward the light, I can't help but smile at the sight of kids playing freely in their front yards and neighbors chatting easily over fence lines. We didn't just dismantle a corrupt HOA, we actively built something infinitely better, a real community where kindness consistently triumphs over control. And those security cameras Karen installed everywhere, we decided to keep them up, not to catch violations, but to record all the wonderful, everyday acts of kindness that happen when neighbors become friends. Because it turns out, the best security isn't about catching people doing things wrong. It's about empowering and helping people do things right. What lesson did you take away from this story? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing to the channel for more stories like this.